My parents kicked me out to let my golden sister live there, even though I bought the house. But karma came faster than expected. I, 37F, have spent the last 15 years developing my career as a senior manager at one of the leading investment banks on Wall Street. This narrative focuses on my complex connection with my sister, Emily, 47F. My parents, both in their late 70s, and a house I recently bought for them that has become the focal point of constant family strife. I have to take you back to the beginning to see how we got here. My parents were in their late 40s when I was born, so I was an unplanned child. My mother would frequently tell me that they already had Emily, who was 10 years old at the time, and that she was more than enough. She did not say this with malice, but rather in a tone that somehow made it worse. She would say, "We didn't plan for you," as she was arranging Emily's extracurricular activities or putting together her college application paperwork. These innocuous comments, which served as a constant reminder of my position as an afterthought in our family, shaped the background of my early years. I might not even be here if it weren't for my maternal grandparents' persistence. My parents saw me as a burden they hadn't requested, but they were thrilled about the possibility of having a second grandchild. I was an afterthought in my parents' lives, and that was evident right away. They had the same ritual every morning when they dropped me off at my grandparents' place. My father would say to my grandfather, "You wanted her?" as he got ready to go for work, key jingling in his palm. "She's all yours." My grandparents' house turned into my true home, a haven where I felt genuinely loved and wanted. They made sure I was fed and taken care of, picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, and took me to the park. I would spend hours learning about numbers and problem solving from my grandfather, a retired math professor. He'd say, "Numbers never lie. These lessons will subsequently influence my professional choices in ways I could not have predicted at the time, such as they tell stories more honest than people do." At their kitchen table, my grandma would assist me with my schoolwork every afternoon, ensuring that I fully grasped each idea. Her patience appeared limitless. She had taught high school before retiring. She would add, "Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take away from you," in a forceful yet kind manner. She also taught me to cook as a means of expressing my creativity and love rather than as a chore. These times spent in their kitchen, reviewing my school day and learning how to measure materials exactly, turned into some of my most cherished recollections. My parents, who were generally exhausted and a little irritated at having to make the trip, would only arrive to pick me up late at night. "Madison," my grandmother would say as she bid me farewell every night, "you're the best thing that ever happened to us." I could almost forget that I wasn't wanted anywhere else while I was in her loving embrace. They became my emotional rock, giving me the stability and affection that were conspicuously lacking at home. My grandfather would often add, "Remember, sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." I learned to live as an afterthought in my own home, as Emily got ready for her promising future. My sister just pretended that I didn't exist. She wasn't nasty or harsh. She would be lying on the couch, talking on the phone about mails and college applications, totally unaware of me, while I played with my dolls in the corner of our shared living room. The difference between how my parents treated Emily and me was clear and consistent. I would hear my mother's proud voice as she talked about Emily's achievements with family or friends. Emily got straight A's again. Emily made the debate team. Or Emily got accepted to her dream college. They went to all of her school functions, science fairs, and debating contests. They consistently cited, "We're too tired. We have to work." Or, "You understand, don't you?" as excuses for their glaring absence from my events. My grandparents took on the role of my cheerleaders, attending every school function with joy and true pride on their faces. I hoped that things at home would change when Emily went off to college. I was the daughter who stayed, and perhaps my parents would see me at last. I was completely mistaken. I went from being invisible to being the housekeeper at the age of 14. My mother would call out to me, "Madison," before I could even put my backpack down after school. "The house needs cleaning. Start with the bathrooms." Emily's chores were taken up by me, along with a number of additional duties. I got to know the washing machine settings and peculiarities by heart, and it became my daily companion, cleaning, cooking, and keeping a home for parents who hardly acknowledged my existence seemed like a continuous loop of housework. My father would remark, "You live here, you need to contribute." If I hesitated in the least, "Your sister always did her part." My career progressed from cleaning to cooking. By the time I was 14, the shift wasn't gradual. My mother just quit preparing dinner one day. One morning, she declared, "You're old enough now, we expect dinner ready when we get home from work." I maintained a stellar academic standing in spite of the taxing domestic responsibilities. My teachers encouraged me to compete in a variety of academic events after noticing my ability for economics and mathematics. In order to help me get ready, my grandfather would dedicate extra time to teaching me complex ideas that were way above my grade level. He would exclaim, "You have a gift with numbers," with pride shining in his eyes. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Dreaming about college was the only way I could get away. I would go to my room every night after doing the dishes and go through university websites. I would see myself traversing several campuses, distant from the never-ending tasks and chilly quiets. I was rewarded for my diligence in school. Despite my household responsibilities, I maintained straight A's, and at the age of 16, I received acceptance letters from a number of prestigious colleges, including some renowned for their top-notch finance programs. Emily's engagement followed. One Sunday afternoon, she bounded in the front door, pulling a tall, smartly dressed man along with her. She let out a squeal. "Mom, Dad, this is James. We're getting married." You would believe that someone had just declared their lottery victory, with my mother sobbing with happiness and my father already taking out his phone to call family. My parents literally sprung from their seats. "We'll cover everything," my mother exclaimed as she gave Emily a hug. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." For months, our home was occupied with wedding preparations. Every discussion centered on guest lists, venues, and flowers, with expensive outfits, high-end vendors, and everything at the top end. Money appeared to flow like water. Despite attending the wedding, my grandparents didn't appear to enjoy the extravagant decor. My grandfather merely shook his head at the champagne fountain. And I saw my grandma scowl at a sculpture that most likely cost more than a semester's tuition at college. However, they likely already knew what was going to happen, so they kept their opinions to themselves. I gave my parents the wonderful news while sitting at our dinner table, with 3 envelopes spread out in front of me on the day I received my acceptance letters. My heart was pounding. "That's nice," my mother murmured without raising her gaze from her meal. "But we can't pay for it. We spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, even took out a loan for it. There's nothing left for college." I stumbled and said, "But you paid for Emily's college," scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. "That was different," my mother said in a condescending tone. "We saw potential in her." The ensuing hush was deafening. "You should get a job. Save up some money, and take out student loans. That's what responsible adults do," my father said in between sentences. I had never before dared to leave the table without being excused. Grabbing my phone with trembling hands, I dialed my grandmother. In a matter of minutes, I was crying as I entered their well-known front door. As he heard my narrative, my grandfather's expression hardened, but I could not quite read the sparkle in his eyes. They exchanged a knowing glance after I had told them everything. My grandfather took my hand and said, "Madison, we've been saving for your education since the day you were born, so we've been expecting something like this." He returned with a folder. After walking to his study, bank statements demonstrating years of meticulous saving were found inside. "You can choose any of those universities. We've got you covered." I moved in with my grandparents that evening after packing my necessities. When I told my folks I was going, they were downstairs watching TV and hardly looked up. My mother said, "Whatever you think is best," while keeping her gaze fixed on the TV. Did I hear the relief in her voice? The years that followed were revolutionary. I decided to enroll in one of the best business schools to study financial analysis. My passion for doing things correctly was maybe prompted by witnessing my parents' poor financial management. My zeal and innate financial skills were noted by my lecturers. Before long, I was staying after class to talk about difficult financial ideas. Someone other than my grandparents saw possibility in me for the first time in my life, real potential. I obtained esteemed internships at significant financial institutions during my time in college. Every summer presented fresh possibilities as well as difficulties. Senior managers were impressed by my analytical abilities and meticulousness. During my performance review at Morgan Stanley, my supervisor said, "You've got a natural instinct for this. We'd love to have you back next summer." With the exception of calls with my grandparents, I kept my head down and concentrated on my schoolwork, hardly thinking about my family. I was hired by one of the city's leading financial firms after I graduated. I never would have imagined earning the starter pay. I located a small, clean, and secure one-bedroom apartment. I was thankful every morning that I didn't have to make breakfast for anyone but myself. As I poured myself into every new challenge, my career took off. And I received bonuses and promotions that I could never have dreamed of when I was younger. I advanced to a senior role in 5 years, overseeing intricate portfolios and fostering significant client connections within the industry. I became known for my strategic thinking and analytical accuracy. Every accomplishment felt like a subliminal affirmation that my parents had misjudged my abilities. In the meantime, I discovered from my occasional chats with my grandparents that Emily's marketing profession wasn't succeeding as she had intended. James, Emily's husband, struggled to maintain a career. They were begging for money from my parents all the time. My grandma told me in one of our weekly conversations, "Your mother emptied her retirement account last month to help them with rent, eh?" Developing my own life and profession, every bonus, promotion, and successful transaction served as a subliminal affirmation that I wasn't the failure my parents had predicted me to be. I had substantial investments and money by my mid-30s, which included enough for a down payment on a home of my own. Then, everything was different. My grandfather died unexpectedly after suffering a severe heart attack. It was a tragic loss. He was the father figure who had supported me when no one else did. And he had been more than just a grandfather to me. After that, my grandma, who had spent more than 50 years with him, seemed to lose her spark. She followed him less than 2 months later. In every significant sense, they had been my biological parents, and suddenly they were no longer with me. Behind me, at the funeral home, I heard my mother's voice while I was setting up my grandmother's funeral. "Madison, do you want some help with the arrangements?" She was standing there when I turned around, looking older and more worn out than I had remembered. A part of me wanted to tell her to go, but I refrained because of her face. "Sure," I said to myself. "That would be nice." My parents started to open up over the course of the following few days as we prepared the service. They acknowledged that they were having difficulties. One afternoon, when we were choosing flowers, my father admitted, "We haven't been financially well off since retirement." He went on to say, "We barely make ends meet," before mentioning Emily's twins. I recognized that my sister and her family continued to live with them and rely on their diminishing income. We convened in a wood panel office for the reading of the will. 1 week after we buried my grandma, Emily and James were slumped on recliners next to my parents, while I sat opposite from them. The tension was thick enough to sever with a knife. And the room smelled of furniture polish and old papers, though none of us realized it at the time. What followed would start a series of events that would permanently alter the relationship of our family. After adjusting his glasses, Mr. Patterson, the notary, started reading in a monotone. I anticipated the standard legalese, but what followed made everyone take notice. "To our beloved granddaughter Madison, we leave our house at 1542 Maple Street and the sum of $150,000. The ensuing hush was deafening. My mother tightened her hold on my father's arm until her knuckles turned white, and Emily's mouth dropped wide. After clearing his throat, Mr. Patterson went on. He glanced at my mother and said, "And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter Margaret." The message said, "Remember, Margaret, that we provided you with $200. 000 just when you needed it most. As we respected your needs back then, we expect you will respect our final decision." My mother's cheeks turned pale after flushing red. Emily and James looked at each other anxiously, while my father gazed at the floor. In the parking lot, my parents came up to me when the notary had finished and collected his paperwork. Something desperate had taken the place of the calm manner they had displayed during the funeral preparations. With a shaky voice, my mother said, "Madison, honey, you must realize that we always assumed we would inherit the house. We're having trouble, but we were depending on it, the mortgage, Emily's family's expenses. We could really use the house. My father continued, stroking his gray hair, speaking about how her youngsters wanted a yard to play in. Emily also joined in. However, I just got into my car and left. I kept thinking about my grandparents' parting gift. Over the course of the following few weeks, my life was well established near the city. And although the house I had inherited held many priceless memories, it was too large for me alone. In the meantime, I learned about my parents' growing financial difficulties from our weekly chats. Helping Emily and her family had drained their retirement funds, and they were finding it more and more difficult to pay their own mortgage. I gave it a lot of thought before deciding I would purchase my parents a better house, one that is single-story, has a lovely garden, but is easier to maintain, with the money I make from the sale of my grandparents' house and my own savings for their retirement years. Something cozy. I was shocked by their response when I shared my concept with them. They actually started crying with happiness. After several weeks of house hunting, I discovered the ideal location. A stunning ranch-style house with large doorways and no stairs in a peaceful neighborhood. My folks couldn't stop gushing about how thrilled they were. After the purchase was finalized, "A proper housewarming party is what we need," my dad said. "It is the least we can do to make all the arrangements." "That would be beautiful," I said, intending to show them the deed at the festivities. "Tell me when, please." Weeks went by. Even though I had a lot of work to do, I kept expecting an invitation. "Oh," my mom would say, "we're still planning. You are aware that these tasks require time." My father would also say, "We want it to be perfect. We'll notify you shortly." I was annoyed by their evasive answers. For some reason, one evening, I was putting Emily's name into Facebook following another evasive phone call from my mother. We weren't connected on any social media, and I hadn't seen her page in years. Just hours ago, it was posted. "I can't wait for this Saturday's housewarming party for Mom and Dad. I can't wait to celebrate with everyone in this beautiful residence." Numerous friends and family members confirmed their attendance in scores of comments on the page. Pictures showed caterers being hired and decorations being set up. This was hardly an impromptu get-together. Weeks had been spent organizing it. I called my mother with a little trembling fingers. "Hello, Mom. I wanted to inquire further about the housewarming party. Do you have a date in mind yet?" "Oh, honey, not just yet," she said with ease. "Most likely in a few weeks. The specifics are still being worked out. Everyone except me, apparently. I had to make a choice as that Saturday drew near. Shall I go up to them? Do I have to let it go? How could they keep me out of the festivities after everything that had transpired, after I had purchased them this house? I would eventually find out, but not in the manner I had anticipated. I parked a block from the house I had purchased for my parents on Saturday. I could see dozens of people mingling through the windows, including Emily's social circle, friends, and relatives. My father offered tours of the house I bought, while my mother, dressed in her special occasion pearls, welcomed guests at the entrance. Twinkling lights and welcome banners adorned the mansion. Laughter and music poured out onto the street. It was obvious that they had spent weeks organizing this housewarming celebration to which I was not invited. For a while, I sat in my car and watched Emily's twins chase each other past crowds of grown-ups who were ogling them. I could see moving boxes with Emily's handwriting on them, stacked in the corner through the wide bay window. The process of relocating her family's possessions had already begun. I inhaled deeply before sneaking in through the side door. The aroma of flowers and catered cuisine filled the house. I heard my father speaking to a gathering of people in the living room when I followed his voice. "After all these years of hard work, we finally did it. Bought our dream home." My mother excitedly added, "Don't forget about Emily. She helped so much with the down payment. Such a wonderful daughter. Always thinking about family first, unlike some people." She went on in response to a question about me. She said, "Our younger daughter hasn't helped us at all. Too busy with her career to care about family." Heat sprang to my face as I stood in the doorway. Everyone jumped when I said, "Actually, I think you got that backwards." There was a dead silence in the room. My dad was the first to recover, grinning tightly. "Madison, what a surprise! Especially since you forgot to invite me to the housewarming party for the house I bought." I said as I entered the room. The quiet grew longer. His shoes quickly piqued Emily's husband's curiosity, inquiring as to why everyone appeared so distressed. One of the twins pulled at Emily's sleeve. You bought it? Yes, but it's ours now. You can't expect eternal gratitude, my mother said with a hint of abrasiveness. With the heads nodding around him, my father added, That's right, gaining confidence, and frankly, you're not welcome here. This is a family gathering. And Emily and her family will be living here too. My mom said, They've already sold their house. It's all arranged. The twins need a stable home. I extracted a folder from within my bag. I remarked, You seem to be confused about something, and held out the ownership and deed documents. This house belongs to me. I never signed it over to you. The color of my mother's face changed from pale to ashen. My father began to ramble on about his responsibilities to his family. Emily's self-assured grin broke when she became aware that her preparations were failing. Despite my shaking palms, I continued, I was planning to give it to you tonight, maintaining a firm voice. I thought this could be a fresh start for all of us. Instead, you've shown me nothing has changed. When my mother said, You can't do this, her voice became a screech. Were your parents? No, I said softly. You're just the people who gave birth to me. My real parents, my grandparents, taught me that family means more than blood. They also taught me about finances. Which is why I own this house and you don't. I turned to speak to the astonished visitors. I'm sorry, but this party is over. This is my house, and I'm asking everyone to leave. My parents, Emily, James, the twins, and all of their guests departed in tears from the porch. I observed them driving off one by one until the street was deserted. In the yard, the ornamental lights continued to sparkle mockingly. Inside, half-empty drinks and discarded food plates covered every surface. The house, which was supposed to be my gift of reconciliation, ended up being the last straw in our relationship. A few weeks later, I found out that they had purchased an apartment using the proceeds from the sale of their previous home. 3 generations crowded into a 2-person apartment when Emily, James, and the twins moved in with them. They tried calling me all the time. At first, their voicemails varied between angry accusations. You've become so heartless, just like your grandparents warned us you would. And guilt-tripping. How could you do this to your own family? I disabled their social media accounts, emails, and phone numbers as a reminder of everything that went wrong in our family. The house is now empty. I have an appointment with a real estate agent tomorrow. It's not worth attempting to cure everything, like old photos in a dusty album. Some relationships are better left in the past. When I eventually have kids of my own, I've made a self-promise that they won't ever need to win my affection or vie for my attention. In contrast to my parents, I will love my kids just as much and without conditions, just as my grandparents loved me. Every heartbreaking reality about my family was exposed that Saturday night. I had not been invited to the housewarming celebration my parents were throwing. When I arrived at the house I had purchased, dozens of visitors, catered food, and, most telling of all, moving boxes with Emily's handwriting strewn around were all visible through the windows. My father proudly declared, After all our hard work, we finally bought our dream home. As I sneaked in through the side entrance. In her comments, my mother praised Emily for allegedly helping with the down payment. She dismissed inquiries about my absence by saying, Oh, Madison's too focused on her career to care about family. The incident encapsulated every insult I had experienced as a youngster, every instance of favoritism toward Emily, and every instance in which I had been regarded as an afterthought. I had never before experienced such clarity as I stood in the doorway, witnessing my parents rewrite history by preparing to relocate my sister's family onto my land without even asking me. Actually, I said, causing the room to quiet down, I believe there was a miscommunication regarding the buyer of this house. I could tell everything I needed to know about their actual emotions from the expressions on their faces: amazement, humiliation, and then indignation. My mother was the first to recover, her voice piercing with a sense of entitlement. What's done is done. The house is ours now, and Emily's family needs the space. I took out the ownership documents and the property deed. No, the house is mine. I never transferred ownership to you. I was planning to give it to you tonight, but clearly that would be a mistake. You can't do this, my mother said in a terrified tone. We're your parents, we have rights. The only rights you have, I said quietly, are the ones I choose to give you. And right now, I'm choosing to ask everyone to leave my property. Following that, there was a frantic evacuation, with guests rushing out with plates of food still in hand, Emily's twins sobbing in bewilderment, and my father trying to maintain some dignity while guiding people to their cars. How could you do this to your own family? Was my mother's final attempt at manipulation. But it failed against my newfound determination. The 5 of them were crowded into a tiny flat. In the weeks that followed, the messages began right away. My father demanded a re-examination. Emily begged with tears for her children's stability, and my mother accused me of cruelty. They were all blocked by me. The vacant house served as a reminder of what might have been, a new beginning. An opportunity for peacemaking. Rather, it served as the impetus for my ultimate separation from a family that had never fully embraced me. A month later, I sold it and used the money to fund my own future. Some asked if I would ever try to mend those bridges or forgive them. However, I came to understand that forgiving does not always entail letting harmful people return to your life. Forgiving oneself for leaving can be necessary at times. Before putting away the old wedding picture of my parents, I promised my future children that they would never experience the anguish of conditional love, the hurt of being compared to a sibling, or doubt their position in the family. With me, the cycle of partiality and emotional blackmail would come to a stop. Emily's twins were playing in the tiny courtyard when I last drove by my parents' apartment complex. I briefly experienced sadness. But it was for the relationships that never truly existed in the first place, not for the ones I had lost. My grandparents taught me that a true family is based on love, respect, and support for one another. Despite the belief that blood is thicker than water, I take their lessons with me as I start this new phase of my life. Love ought to be freely given rather than demanded. Family is more than just genetics. Walking away is sometimes the healthiest course of action. I didn't open my mother's last unread mail, so I erased it. Any defenses or charges it included were no longer relevant. At last, I had discovered how to put my own value ahead of their conditional approval. Their kind of familial devotion has no place in the life I'm creating now. New opportunities await us in the future. Free from the burden of attempting to win affection from those who are unable to freely give it. I learned what true family looks like from my grandparents. I'll build that kind of family for myself someday, one based on respect for one another, unconditional love, and the knowledge that each individual is equally important. At long last, the chapter of being the family afterthought is over. Being the author of my own life is only the beginning of my journey. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Called off my wedding after my fiancé allowed kids but banned my daughter. Blaming her for ruining our engagement party by being ill earlier this week. Madison, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and I, 38, male, were about to tie the knot, but I abruptly called it off. For the previous 3 years, we had been together. Everything was going well until we got engaged, which was around 6 months ago. When we started talking about who we wanted to invite to the wedding, things started to go south. Naturally, I wanted my daughter to be present because I have one. Madison, however, was very clear that she did not want any children present at the wedding. Given that she has 2 children of her own from a previous marriage and 6 nieces and nephews with whom she is very close. This was an odd position. Given that the majority of those we invited were also parents. I couldn't understand why she didn't want any children at the wedding. At first, we argued about it a lot, but I finally gave in. I grudgingly agreed to keep my daughter away from the wedding, provided she didn't invite any children from her side of the family. To put things in perspective, my daughter is 14 years old. So she is not even a little child. However, Madison was unaffected by that. She informed me that she wanted a stress-free wedding and that she didn't want any exceptions. Even though she loved my daughter, her own children, and even her nieces and nephews, she said that by making exclusions, she didn't want to alienate anyone who had children. I was really angry about it, but I reasoned that because she had already made up her mind, there wasn't much I could do. If she really wanted a wedding without children, the actual wedding was going to be small. Just a few close friends and family would be coming, and we would be married in my parents' backyard. I decided to let it go. After reasoning that the kids wouldn't be missing out on much fun, just a few days prior to the wedding, everything changed. Kate, Addison's younger sister, emailed me while I was at work. She was requesting approval for the email, which included pictures of her two daughters wearing wedding-appropriate attire. I was initially perplexed. Then I saw that Kate had sent the email to our shared wedding email address, which we had set up especially for vendor communications and RSVPs. It was too late when I realized it must have been an accident. I had previously viewed and captured a screenshot of the email. I tried to check the email again a few minutes later, but Addison had already erased it. I had finally figured out what was going on. By that point, Addison had claimed that there would be no children at the wedding, but in reality, she was planning to invite her own children, as well as relatives and nephews, but not my daughter. I was incensed at her dishonesty. That day, I didn't say anything. As soon as I got home from work, I acted as though nothing was wrong. Addison was being a little odd at first, perhaps because she thought I had read the email and figured out what she was doing. However, Addison calmed down and resumed her typical behavior once I kept everything a secret. I knew she was planning something behind my back, and this was around 2 days before the wedding. I, therefore, made the decision to ask my daughter about her feelings on Addison. Even before I proposed, I had discussed this with her, but since I was really reconsidering the wedding, I felt it would be best to have another conversation. In retrospect, I'm really happy I took that choice. My daughter told me that Addison had always been kind to her prior to the engagement. But after that, something had changed. My daughter clarified that she hadn't brought it up sooner because she didn't want to spoil my happiness with Addison. After witnessing it, Addison, however, had been acting strangely toward her after the engagement. Addison behaved completely differently when I wasn't there. Whenever she came to visit, my custody agreement states that I get to spend half the month with my daughter, which is a substantial amount of time. When I got home from work, my daughter claimed that Addison would activate the charm, but she ignored her the rest of the time. Prior to the engagement, this wasn't the case. It was unexpected and disheartening to hear this. My daughter also revealed that she thought Addison no longer wanted her in her life. When she learned that she intended a wedding without children, she believed it wouldn't matter. So she didn't even try to go. I felt so bad about myself for letting Addison convince me not to invite my own kid to my wedding. I made the decision to call off the wedding at that point. I talked to Addison the day before the wedding. After that, I didn't bother returning home. Addison called me multiple times, but I didn't answer. I told my parents to inform her that I would meet her on the wedding day because I knew she would get in touch with them next. I stayed with my daughter all day instead of returning home. By the end of the day, we both felt much better. I spent the night at a hotel after dropping her off at her mother's house. I arrived at my parents' house the following morning exactly 1 hour before the ceremony was set to start. A few people had already arrived when I got there, including Addison's dad and both of her sisters, Kate and Amelia. Naturally, all 6 of their children were present, along with Addison's 2 children, who were all under 12 and running around the area. Addison hurried to meet me at the door. As soon as she noticed me, she started by saying that Kate and Amelia couldn't leave their children behind, despite her having informed them that the wedding was child-free. She went on to say that her parents thought it would be odd if she married without her own children being there. I could tell she thought I was crazy because she was making up all these absurd excuses. However, I remained silent until she had finished speaking. Then, she began asking me strange questions, like where I had been the night before, and why I was dressed the way I was. I simply got out my phone, showed her a screenshot of the email that Kate had inadvertently sent to our joint wedding email account, and laughed in her face. That was sufficient to silence her. She realized right away that she had been apprehended and that she couldn't get away with it by talking. It was already too late when she began to apologize. I informed her that I had spent the day before with my daughter and discovered that she had been treating my daughter differently for the past few months, ever since we became engaged. I didn't even want an explanation or an answer at this point. I simply informed her that we were done. She clearly did not value my daughter, therefore, I made it clear that I would not marry her. I had never treated her children any differently than I had my own, so it was very painful. However, I didn't believe it was a good idea for us to get married because it was obvious that she didn't really value my family or me. I spoke up and didn't wait for her to answer. I simply left. I didn't turn around, even though she was shouting for me. I had nothing better to do, so I got into my car, drove to a hotel, and napped for a long time. My phone was inundated with text when I got up at lunchtime. Addison's family was unhappy, and everyone who had been invited to the wedding was perplexed. However, I was unable to care. I gave my friend and family a quick rundown of the circumstances and then let it go. I visited my daughter later. I informed her that I intended to spend more time with her and that I had cancelled the wedding. I acknowledged that, without even recognizing it. We had begun to drift apart during the previous few months. She used to come to me right away if she had a problem with someone, so I realized something was wrong. She hadn't spoken though with Addison. At least we were able to work things out, even if we both were a little emotional. Speaking of Addison, that's where I'd been having trouble. 5 days have passed since the day we were meant to tie the knot, and by now, almost everyone is aware of the reason I called off the wedding. Her dishonesty was just as much of a factor as the way she treated my daughter. Being dishonest is, in my opinion, a major deal breaker in any relationship. I've already been cheated on twice. And I can tell you that it always begins with a simple fib. She believed that she could get away with telling such a large falsehood. I don't believe that canceling the wedding at the last minute was incorrect on my part. Yes, it was sudden and rude. But considering that she had intended to surprise me with the kids at the last minute, I believe it was reasonable. Her family feels I'm being harsh and is angry that I didn't offer her an opportunity to clarify. Addison has been contacting me constantly, as has the rest of her family. Addison's only justification is that she had good reason to invite my kid, but she couldn't beg me not to come. She also finds it quite offensive that I didn't think our relationship needed at least a chat before terminating it in that manner, even after we had been together for so long. She has stated that she will discuss her reasons in person, but she has not disclosed them. How she could possibly defend her decision to not invite my daughter to our wedding is beyond me. To the best of my knowledge, she and my daughter have never had any problems together. I still believe like I ought to have talked to her first, though I've been feeling guilty for the past few days. And I'm not sure why. I believe that rather than acting as though everything was all right up until the last minute, I ought to have been honest with her. I should have gone right home from work and addressed her the day I learned what was planned. I could have prevented a lot of the drama that is going on now if I had done that. I've been bothered by the fact that I feel like a bit of a jerk for not handling things better. Am I the jerk for abruptly calling off the wedding and not talking to my fiancé first? Update. 3 days have passed since I posted, and I'm still at the motel. I contacted Addison today and informed her that she needed to vacate the house right now since it was my house before she moved in. I believe it is only right that she must depart now that we are done. She has till the end of the month, in my opinion, to find a place since sleeping in a hotel isn't a practical long-term solution. I intend to crash with a buddy until then. I feel much better about my choice. Aside from that, my friends have encouraged me that, in the end, I made the decision to become a father because it is what I value most. I don't believe I have to apologize for putting my daughter first. People can avoid me if they have an issue with that. I don't give a damn about Addison's motivations. I don't think I need to hear them at all. If she can't send me an explanation, I'm not interested in seeing her at the moment, since it's obvious that her parents and sister were aware of her scheme the entire time and kept quiet about it. I've also barred them. I thought I got along well with her family, so this is disappointing. Before everything that transpired, I firmly believed that I had become a member of their family. I hadn't replied to Addison much up until last night, but I did advise her to begin searching for a new residence. I also informed her that she may text me to explain why she didn't want my kid to attend the wedding, but I also made it apparent that there was no turning back once the harm had been done. She has not responded to that message. I apologize to those who inquire, but I have no idea why she would be acting in such a different way around my kid, since I'm genuinely interested. I've talked to my daughter extensively, but she, too, doesn't know. My daughter was as perplexed as I was when I showed her the messages and we talked about Addison's actions. She informed me that she was surprised when Addison began acting differently around her in the early days following the engagement. My daughter even made an attempt to patch things up. But Addison remained aloof and uninterested in her attempts. Addison appears to be the issue here based on what I've heard. Although I am aware that many children struggle to understand their parents' separation. My daughter is not one of those children, and she has no justification for lying about Addison. To begin with, I was never married to her mother. We dated for 2 years before splitting up when she was 3 years old. She hardly recalls our time together. For the last 5 years, my ex has also been married. I have no doubt that my daughter was not at all offended by my choice to move on and wed Addison until recently. They had a nice connection. I'm not claiming my kid is flawless, even though she may be in my opinion, but I do know she doesn't lie, especially when it comes to something like this. She is aware of how much I respect openness and truthfulness in my loved ones. When she claims that Addison began acting differently, I genuinely believe her. Nevertheless, I doubt Addison will reveal her motivations. I texted her a few hours ago, and she hasn't responded yet. She probably hasn't received my message because she works from home and must be on her phone all the time for her job. She always responds right away, so I'm certain she's ignoring me. However, it makes no difference. All I want is for her to leave my home so I may resume my comfortable life. I have to go back to work in a few days, and staying in this motel is strange. Second update. 3 days have passed since I sent Addison a text. She did respond earlier today. She claimed to understand why I didn't want to see her face to face, but she demanded that we do so. So she could give me an explanation for why she didn't want my daughter to attend the wedding. Despite the fact that we are no longer together, she said she didn't want me to misinterpret her. Addison said that her reasons were legitimate, and that she didn't want me to think she was the villain. She said she didn't want to hurt me, so she lied? That reasoning was absurd because she still caused me pain. I responded in less than 30 minutes, being very clear that I would not be speaking with her face to face. Anything she said had to be sent via text, and that was the end of it. She said it was around an hour ago. She stated that something that occurred at the engagement party was the reason she didn't want my daughter to attend the wedding. Regretfully, my daughter wasn't feeling well on the day of the engagement celebration. I already knew she wouldn't be able to come when it was my turn to keep her for the month. Despite feeling ill, she insisted on going, even though I told her she could stay in her room. She desired to join in the festivities. She went back upstairs to relax after spending a few minutes downstairs toasting with everyone. Although some people inquired about her well-being, it didn't cause a significant disturbance. Addison went upstairs to see how my daughter was doing, but she thought she had stolen our thunder. She was chatting and laughing on the phone with a friend, according to Addison. My daughter didn't appear ill at all. Addison, who tends to stir things up, talked to her sisters about her worries rather than to me or my daughter. After the engagement, Addison started to remove herself from my daughter because of this minor miscommunication, which unnecessarily escalated. Addison persuaded herself that my daughter would eventually cause issues because she wasn't thrilled with our marriage. That one small incident was the only source of this view. When Addison told me this, I was appalled, so I didn't even bother answering her reply. I questioned my daughter about Addison's words to put things in perspective. My daughter acknowledged that she was still feeling poorly that day, but she was conversing with a friend. Speaking with a friend was merely a means of self-distraction. It did not indicate that she was not ill. Addison's logic was utterly nonsensical. I think this episode provided Addison a reason to stop acting like she was being kind to my kid, even though I think she may have been insecure from the beginning. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't wed Addison. She would have undoubtedly caused further issues along the road. In hindsight, there were further warning signs. When my daughter was around, Addison would often remark that I didn't spend enough time with her. Ironically, I never voiced any complaints, and she frequently spent comparable amounts of time with her own children. Her behavior as a parent was admirable in my opinion. When I think back on my earlier posts, I see that Addison was a major factor in my lack of time with my kid. She quietly took up all of my attention, both mentally and practically. I was so committed in our relationship at the time that I didn't realize it. It was too late before the warning signs were noticed. I'm relieved that I was able to end that relationship at last because I didn't want to remain with someone if it meant sacrificing my relationship with my daughter. I'm not really sure how to interpret that absurd message that Addison sent me today. It puzzled me that she destroyed our connection over something so trivial. Something that might have been settled with a conversation. So, for a long time, I thought about answering her and telling her precisely how I felt. However, I changed my mind since I didn't think it was worth the hassle. Until it's time for me to go back home, I would much rather ignore her. Unfortunately, since I need my job clothing. It might happen shortly. She needs us somewhere to stay soon, I hope. Although my friends have graciously allowed me to stay with them, I really simply want to return home. Update 3. I made this post 2 days ago. I returned home earlier today to get my clothes and other necessities. I was heading to a friend's apartment and decided to leave the hotel because it was becoming too costly. I made the decision to visit the house and get everything I required. I wasn't sure if Addison would be home because I banned her and didn't respond to her messages after she sent them. Regrettably, she was present when I got there in the afternoon. She obviously wanted to talk and appeared sad to see me. I began gathering my belongings as fast as I could, intending to be done and out of there before anyone could speak. I urged her to start looking for a place so I could move back in as I was ready to leave. She apologized profusely and followed me as I made my way to my car. She claimed she shouldn't have lied or made such a huge deal out of the engagement party event, and she acknowledged that she felt awful about what had transpired. She clarified that she recently got into a battle with her sisters after understanding how their advice had led to the breakdown of our relationship, and that they had made it look like a much greater problem than it actually was. Addison pleaded for another chance, saying she would improve her connection with my daughter and me. Hearing her plea made me sad, but it was too late. When I got to my car, I informed her that although I could relate to her feelings, my kid was the most important thing to me. I had a duty to act morally toward my daughter. Addison was clearly about to cry, but I didn't want to deal with it. I drove off after saying a brief goodbye and reminding her to find another home. It was far more difficult to see her in person than it was to text her. Even if I felt like a bit of a jerk for leaving like that, I don't regret anything though. It had to be done. I'm staying with a friend for the time being with the hopes that Addison will find somewhere else within the next few weeks. After she leaves, I can return home and carry on with my life. Or whatever normal will be going forward. Although it may take some time to get over this, the bright side is that my relationship with my daughter is stronger than it has ever been. Our relationship has returned to its pre-engagement state. There are no secrets between us. She tells me everything about her life once more. Seeing her chat eagerly about her school day over our FaceTime today made it all worthwhile. In a few weeks, we even have a beach vacation planned. I think I could use the break. So I've invited some friends with children her age to come along. Although the last few weeks have been difficult, I have optimism for brighter times to come. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.